Welcome to Medical Marijuana and Wellness. Tonight's topic is Florida's medical marijuana program, and a subject that has been discussed and one that has a lot of questions. And I have to tell you, tonight is very special because I think this particular webinar is one that not only has the perspective of a doctor, a medical doctor, which is Dr. Michelle Beasley, who's a specialist, a medical marijuana doctor from Pensacola, Florida, and myself, who's a medical marijuana patient, as well as a medical marijuana practitioner. I do have to mention that Dr. Beasley is not going to be able to make the live presentation tonight for personal reasons, but she did work with me. We put together a very comprehensive video that we'd like to have you watch, and it will give you a lot of information on this particular subject. Before I begin that, there's a little housekeeping I want to do, and that is to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. It'll be put out on YouTube at the end of this particular webinar, and you'll get an email with a link to that particular video, as well as a copy of the presentation in Flipbook format. I also want to point out that if you have any questions, please feel free to hit the Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen. We are here to really answer your questions, and please feel free to, this is your chance to be able to just get that question off your chest. And I do want to mention that if you have any issues related to medical cannabis or your medical condition, please remember to contact your doctor, your medical marijuana doctor, or your medical marijuana practitioner. That being said, let's jump into the video. Like I mentioned, it's very comprehensive, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions. But if not, again, please feel free to ask your questions, and let's jump into it. And then at the end, I'll answer the questions you submitted prior to the webinar. Let's jump into it, and thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to Medical Marijuana and Wellness. Tonight's topic is Florida's medical marijuana program. We're going to give you the current version in 2026. And joining me tonight for this webinar is Dr. Michelle Beasley, a doctor in Pensacola, Florida. Dr. Beasley, thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me again.
Now, a lot of the questions in this presentation you kind of get on a daily basis. Is that correct?
Yes, this is bread and butter for me.
Great. So let's kind of jump into it, because I know there's a lot of questions about the program and how it works. That's what we're trying to explain tonight. There's a little group called the Office of Medical Marijuana Use, OMMU. Tell me a little bit about that.
Right. So it's our governing body. So Office of Medical Marijuana Use is under Florida Department of Health, and that's where our initial legislation in the Florida statute put it. So in some states it could be in Department of Agriculture or not Department of Health, but this is where we are in Florida. So they have a big job. So they regulate the dispensaries themselves. They help the patients get qualified, get the cards. They also give doctors guidance, but they are not our governing, we still have the Board of Medicine and Medical Quality Assurance as far as there's complaints on physicians, but they've got their hand in that as well. So they're kind of on the patient side, the doctor side, and the medical marijuana treatment clinics dispensary side as well.
And they have this site called knowthefactsmmj.com that I think is very important to take a look at. It's kind of a guiding light here in Florida for the Florida regulations. Now, there's some questions that we get asked. Current status is the law was put in place in 2016. But it's amazing how many new patients how many patients actually have a card.
Right. So August is actually 10 years that I've been in business. And I think August was also 10 years when the first product was dispensed statewide. So we're almost at 1 million. I was hoping we would cross 1 million patients by the 10-year anniversary, but we are the largest medical state. So, even though California, Colorado have been doing it a lot longer, we just have a bigger population. So we're the biggest medical marijuana state at this point. I believe it was 23 licenses. I think there's been some new ones given. So plenty of access for patients. Most cities will have a dispensary. There are some things we don't have in Florida that other states do. Just what you have to remember is, because there's no federal oversight, every state does it differently. So while some medical patients in other states can grow their own plants, Florida cannot. Reciprocity is the term, which means, is your card accepted in other states? Florida, we cover our snowbirders. So if you live in Michigan, most of the year, but you don't like winter in Michigan and you come live in Florida for at least 30 days a year, Florida will let you also have a medical marijuana card for Florida. We don't honor your Michigan card. Whereas other states, say Massachusetts, you can pay a $50 fee for the right to use your Florida card and walk into a Massachusetts dispensary. Nevada gives you a discount for being an out-of-state medical patient. They don't charge you anything. They give you a discount for doing it. So every state's doing it differently.
You mentioned the dispensaries. There are 776 dispensaries throughout the state of Florida, and we also have a caregiver program. I think that's quite a population. population. I think even compared to states like California, that's quite a number of dispensaries.
A lot of the dispensaries have delivery programs. So even if you didn't have a dispensary, when we started 10 years ago, we had no stores in Pensacola, but we had companies that would do home delivery to drivers by private car. So even if you're in rural Florida, there's still ways to access medication.
So the question then becomes, okay, so I'm thinking about getting a medical marijuana card. How do I qualify?
Right, so you need to see a physician. Ideally, more physicians would be qualified medical marijuana providers. In the state statute, it says, Florida, you can be an MD or a DO. There's a class you have to take, and then you can be certified to certify for cannabis. A lot of physicians choose not to do that. So most family practice doctors, most surgeons, most psychiatrists are not doing it. So in Florida, it's most common to see a medical cannabis physician, which is what I am. To see a physician, you have to have an eligible condition. So the constitutional amendment from 2016 gave us 10 listed conditions, and you can see that on the slide. And then we have a couple other factors. So chronic non-malignant pain, which means the pain can't stand alone by itself. So you can't just say, I have chronic pain, I need cannabis. Chronic pain has to be caused by one of the 10 eligible conditions. So kind of in my brain, if you have to have one of the 10 eligible, why use that qualification? We just qualify you for your MS or your cancer or whatever is causing your pain. So that's not a common diagnosis. Terminal illness. So, it doesn't matter what you're dying of, COPD, lung cancer, you'd already be qualified under the cancer, but say COPD is not one of the 10, but if you're in a terminal condition due to your COPD, you could get qualified. Right. That caveat is you have to have another physician certify that you are indeed terminal. So just one medical cannabis physician can't do it by themselves. That condition does not get used often because of that second condition clause. The most common one we use is this last one, the other debilitating conditions comparable to those enumerated. So for instance, osteoarthritis, inflammation, the joint pain, I can compare that to multiple sclerosis. Huntington's disease is a movement disorder similar to Parkinson's. Anxiety disorder is a mental health condition that can be similar to PTSD. But we've been doing it 10 years. We have those data banks built up. So most things we can qualify for based on that other debilitating conditions comparing back to this 10.
And that's really important. That's a really important factor because I know, like, for example, in my condition, I was in an auto accident and left with 7 herniated discs in my neck and 2 in my back. That's not technically one of the 10 qualifying conditions, but it's very similar. I guess what I qualify is something similar to something like MS.
Right, because of nerve pain. MS has neuropathy. Degenerative disc disease, herniated disc has neuropathy. So that's how we would compare it. So I would say osteoarthritis and degenerative disc are probably two of the most common conditions we qualify, as well as anxiety disorder or depression.
And I think that's one of the things that really Florida did right and should be complimented for that. Now, one of the questions people have, a lot of people watching tonight will probably already have their card, but if you don't have your card, the question is, how do you get it?
Right. So like I was saying, you have to see a certified physician. Once the physician puts you into the medical marijuana use registry, which is the database established by the Office of Medical Marijuana Use we were referring to earlier, you get email. So it's all electronic, which is nice. There is a paper version, but it takes a lot longer. So we enter your email into the computer. The computer sends you emails on how to apply for the card. Our offices are happy to help you finish that application. So, we don't leave the patients to themselves to have to, find it on their phone. For the longest time, the phones were frustrating because on the mobile view, the place to log in didn't show up if you didn't turn your phone sideways. So our staff's happy to help with those kind of little glitches. So if you have a Florida driver's license or Florida ID, the medical marijuana system actually speaks to the DMV computer system. So you've already proven you're a Florida resident for the DMV purposes. So it takes that. You don't have to prove, scan power bills, water bills, deeds, leases, any of that kind of stuff. So, when I started, it was over 6 months for a patient to get a card approval. Now you can pay online, get it done within 10 minutes. So, most of the time the patients have the email that says their card is electronically approved. By the time they leave my office, they're able to go shopping.
They walk out with that P number, that registration number. That's really important.
Right. The P number, and the email says this is your temporary ID card. So you still have to show a photo ID when you go into the stores, but they have access to the same computer system. So you show your Florida driver's license to prove you're you, and then they can look you up in the computer. They can see the orders the physician placed, how much you're allowed, and you can shop that day. There's no more, waiting 6 months. It was horrible. Starting in 2016, I had cancer patients dying before they ever got their cards approved. So this is much better. We can, the information's still fresh in their mind from my teaching. They can go right to the dispensary and pick up product.
One of the things about our program is there are what they call limits as to what you can get and you can't get, and there's also time frames. This can be a bit confusing. Can you take me through this?
Right. So your first visit is the only time everything is going to match up, because you get the card the first day, you see the doctor the first day. But in the Florida statute, they set these day limits initially, and then the computer system got built off of those number of days. So what I've been told is because the computer coding is expensive to redo, we will never leave these strange numbers. So, why is it 35 days for each smokable flower order instead of 30? It was honestly, 35 was half of 70, and we had the non-smokable products first. Why is it 70? Well, initially it was 45 days and someone proposed 90 and they compromised on 70. So the computer is basically built on multiples of 70. It makes no sense. It works fine. The limits, I would say for 95% of patients are adequate the way they are, even though the numbers are weird. Most patients don't have to think about it on a day-to-day basis because the limits are more than adequate. So you have to see the physician every 7 months, which is the 210-day mark. The card is good for 365 days. You'll see the doctor again before your card has to renew, and then your card renews before your third doctor visit. The nice thing is the state's computer system does send you reminders. So if your card expires at 365 days, 45 days before that, so day 320, you get an email. 2 weeks before your card expires, you get another email from the state, and the day it expires. So they remind you 3 times, like, hey, your card's coming up for renewal. The physician's offices, obviously each physician's office is in charge of reminding patients of their appointments coming up. But we have an automated system. You did a phone call, an email. The reason the smokable is less than the non-smokable routes is it was a federal trafficking. So the limit for flower is 2.5 ounces in a 35-day period. If they had done 70, that would have been 5 ounces, and marijuana trafficking is 4 ounces in federal law. So it was more of a patient protection, as they didn't want patients potentially susceptible to a trafficking charge because of the amount of ounce possession. So there was some method to the madness for that number. And one recent change to the system that happened the end of July that did not exist before is now the registry will not let you renew your card if you are not up to date with your doctor. So there were instances of people that would keep renewing the card for $75 once a year to have a nice laminated, ID card that made them look legal, even though they might not have been purchasing legal medicine. For instance, if they had to show an employer, that kind of thing. And the state closed that loophole July 27th. So now with the computer registry, if the computer does not see that you've seen your doctor in the last 210 days, it will not let you hit the button to renew the card. So to me, that's the way it should have always been set up. You need both to make legal purchases to get safe medication. And so now the computer is facilitating that.
Now, you mentioned the different possession limits. I know this can confuse a lot of people because when we talk about mg, that's milligrams, and we talk about ml, that's milliliters. And I think there's some differences between that. But each of the different subcategories of being able to get a recommendation has a particular limit. And I think most of those, as you said, for 95% of the patients, they're adequate.
Yes. And it again, it's weird math. I call it, it's OMMU math. I think my brain just thinks in multiples of 70 now instead of multiples of 10 or 100. It's important, I think, from this slide to note that you can't have the max of every single route. So your daily limit, what I call the umbrella limit, is 350 milligrams a day, and it's a 70-day order. So 350 milligrams times 70 days is 24,500. So think of that as your umbrella amount. If you look at the vaporized products, the vaporized product limit, we could put all 350 of that daily into vaporized products if that's all someone used. But if you look above that at edibles, it's only a 60 a day. And this is coming, it's not necessarily from the patient standpoint, it's more public safety. So the state did not want a bunch of THC candy out on the streets for children to get it accidentally. They didn't want an oversupply. So our rules related to medical marijuana is no more than 60 a day. So even though you have 350 total, if you tell me you only use gummies, under regular rule, I cannot put more than 60 of that 350 in the edibles. Topical, I can put up to 150. Oral, so to me, oral and sublingual is a little bit duplicative. Anything you can buy under sublingual, you can also buy under oral. Capsules, you can only get under oral, you can't get under sublingual. So commonly, like for my patients, I often leave sublingual off, just trying to simplify things, and I'll just use oral. Because for the past, there was about a 2 or 3 month period where there was one product from one store before that was only sublingual. They subsequently changed it. So, oral, topical, vaporized, and edibles are the more common, what I call the processed routes that are under that 350 milligram per day limit. Flower, it's done in ounces, and it's just the way it was written in the statute. It's done in ounces, not milligrams. And so it is 2.5 ounces in any 35-day period. The other thing that's important that is hard to explain, hard to understand, is it's a rolling limit. So it's 2.5 ounces in any 35-day period. So the way I explain it to patients is, if you're a brand new patient and you walk into the dispensary and you want to buy 2.5 ounces all at once, you could, but you would have nothing until day 36 from then. So, I tell people it goes to jail for 35 days. Or if you bought half an ounce today, that half ounce is in jail for 35 days. The other 2 ounces you still have to purchase with. So maybe tomorrow, next week, next month. Let's say day 20, you go buy 2 ounces all at once. Say it's a Labor Day sale and you buy 2 ounces all at once. You wouldn't have anything from day 20 to day 35 because those 2 purchases are still in jail. Day 36, only that first half ounce purchase comes out because each purchase has to stay in jail, quote unquote, I'm using jail, for 35 days. So that's where people get confused. Like even though 2.5 ounces a month, plenty for most people, the sales will mess, so if you think about it, it's half an ounce a week. But if you make a bigger purchase, so say it's Black Friday and you make a big purchase, you might have all of your ounces in jail, so to speak, and you'll miss the Christmas sales because Thanksgiving and Christmas aren't 35 days apart. The only thing patients have to be aware of is that shopping pattern, and it's 70 days for all the other routes. But the nice thing is this computer system keeps track of all of the balances for you. So you don't have to keep track of it in your mind. You can log into the medical marijuana registry and say, okay, Dr. Beasley gave me 4,200 milligrams of edibles. I have 3,000 milligrams available today. I can go take advantage of this Labor Day sale.
And that's the OMMU website. You actually can go in, you have a portal, you can take a look at your consumption levels, your limits, your recommendations. I think the other thing about the slide that it's important to let your doctor know what types or what routes of administration that you prefer to use, or that is really the ones that you will be using the most. For example, I probably use edibles more than I use smokable flower, for example.
And some patients don't know. So our default, with a new patient is to put some in all the routes so people can try it and figure out what they like. I've also had people come in, they've told me they have been using cannabis for 40 years smoking it and they're never going to use anything else. And I'm like, yes, sir. But I still put some in all the routes. And some of those patients 6 months later are like, you know what, those edibles really work well. Or vice versa. I'm never going to smoke. I'm not a tobacco smoker. There's no way I'm ever going to smoke cannabis. And they come back 6 months later and like, that's actually the most effective form for me. So in general, we will try to put something in all the routes until you've been a patient long enough to figure out what works best for your conditions.
Now, we've been asked a number of questions in the past. One of them is, where can I find a physician to get your recommendation?
Yeah, so the OMMU on that Know the Facts website does have I believe it's by zip code. You can search for physicians. You can also ask the physicians you already have. So your primary care doctor might have a favorite cannabis physician that they know in your area. I know I get a lot of referrals from certain family practice doctors and oncologists in my area. There have been multi-state operators who come in and try to, do what's legal in California or Colorado or wherever, where telemedicine for initial visits might be legal. Florida, it has to be a face-to-face visit for the first time. Follow-up visits in Florida can be virtual. So we can't do video chats, phone calls for the follow-up visits, but the first one has to be in person, face-to-face.
Let's talk about the next one, which is where can I get a medical marijuana card? I think this is where the licensed doctors come into play.
Right. Well, like your slide earlier said, over 700, almost 800 stores now available. All the stores are meeting the safety testing guidelines required by the state. So everyone's medications are safe. But based on that initial visit, if a patient's telling me, oh, I'm more interested in oral or more interested in edibles or more interested in flower, or simply this is the part of town I live in, the physicians can help direct people where's the best place to start. It doesn't mean it's the only place anyone will ever go. Kind of that, that first visit, and then here's some other ones. We can give them information on all of them have new customer discounts. So, go here and try these edibles, go here, try this flower, or this one, this one is the closest to where you work. This one's the closest to where you live. And so we can give those that kind of advice while they're there for that new patient visit.
And I think it's important to point out these licensed medical marijuana treatment centers, these dispensaries, they actually are highly regulated. Their products, they have to do 2 in-house quality checks and then 1 with a third-party quality check. So you have a pretty safe product as opposed to something that's out on the street. I think that's one thing to point out. And I think the other thing to point out was when I first got into the program about 8 years ago, 7-8 years ago, the problem that we had was the street price was so much less than the dispensary prices. I think right now the dispensary prices are pretty competitive from what I I see. And I think that's important to point out. 5 months ago, I was challenged that the dispensary price was higher than the street price. So I had one of my people that I knew go out and look at what the street prices were. And I was shocked to find out that my dispensary was selling for less than the person on the street.
Right. And don't have to worry about heavy metals, pesticide contamination. And they actually use the standard for brand name drugs. So if you're a brand name drug in the United States, you have to be plus or minus 10%. So if a pill is labeled 10 milligrams, it can be between 9 and 11. And that's what medical marijuana use office uses for their testing guidelines. Generic drugs can be plus or minus 20%. So these standards are actually more than the FDA's generic drug standards for the United States.
The other question becomes into place, will I need a background check to get my medical marijuana card? And I think there's two different ways of looking at it. One is if you're a patient and the other is if you're a caregiver.
Yeah, there's no background check standard for being a patient. There are some limitations. I believe it's chapter 883, which is the drug convention. I'm blanking on the term. Basically, if you've been convicted of drug-related crimes, not a simple possession charge, but more along the levels of trafficking or selling, you are prohibited from getting a card while you're still serving the sentence. So like if you're on probation or those kind of things, you're not allowed to get a card, but that's done through the state of Florida. So again, that medical marijuana use computer system talks to the Department of Corrections system. And so that would flag when you're applying for your very first card, but it's not a background check, so to speak. There's no other aspect of it. It's only related to that chapter. 90% sure I have it right. It's 883. It could be 838. It's that chapter of the Florida statute is the only thing. For caregivers, you only have to do a background check to be a caregiver if you're not a close relative. And the state of Florida doesn't differentiate between step or half relations. So if you're a stepchild, you do not have to get a background check to be a caregiver for your stepmother. Or if you're, for your half sibling, no background check. But say your elderly neighbor can't drive and needs help getting their medicine to the dispensary. So if you're completely not related, the state of Florida would require you to get a background check before you're a caregiver for your neighbor. And that's just to keep, elderly people from being victimized, that using their medication, that kind of thing. So that's, it's more of a patient safety standpoint.
One of the bigger questions that comes up, I'm sure you get this on a regular basis, because I sure do. Can I purchase a new gun?
Not today. We have another webinar where we discuss these issues. ATF is looking at changing it, but right now the federal legislation regarding gun ownership says no one that's using illegal controlled substances. And in the federal eyes, that standard is changing. The move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is helping with the DEA, but the ATF is the three-letter agency that is in charge of the buy new gun. So there's a proposed form to change it, but as of today, you cannot, because when you go in to answer the question to buy the gun, the form 4473, it says, are you addicted to or use illicit substances? This includes cannabis, which may be legal in your state, but is still federally illegal. And the proposed change would say this includes recreational cannabis. So it would leave medical cannabis out of it. You can honestly circle no and the background check can happen. You also cannot use a gun while you're under the influence of your medication. So just like same standard as alcohol, you can't do both at the same time.
I think it's important to point out that this gun legislation, the same thing with TSA's direction that you can fly with medical marijuana and also the Schedule 3, those are proposed directions. And those are pieces of paper that were issued as executive orders, but they are not law. They still have to go through the process of having all the different agencies approve those, which is going to take a while. As we can see, the Supreme Court said you can own a gun if you have medical marijuana, but it's going to take a while for that registration form to be changed by the federal government so that you can walk into a store and actually buy something. So be careful, because during that difficult period between a declaration and reality. So we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We just don't know how long the tunnel is. That's one of the things you got to be careful of.
Correct.
What is the difference between a recommendation and a prescription? Because I know when I go to a doctor, he gives me a prescription. You're giving me a recommendation.
Right. So this is a legal line that started, when it started in California, what was it, 1996, I think? Prescriptions are regulated by the FDA, and cannabis has been a federally illegal substance. And so doctors would have been in violation of federal law if they were prescribing cannabis. So the way they got it around it, I believe it was the 12th Circuit California courts, is they said that the doctors are not at risk of being prosecuted as long as they're giving recommendations, not prescription. So This is something that could change with the DEA Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 change. Could FDA suddenly make cannabis federally approved? You know, if it were an FDA medication, we could suddenly be required to write prescriptions for it.
Right.
But as of August 24th, 2026, we're still doing recommendations, and they're not binding. So this can be frustrating because I could, you know, write in the recommendation, I don't want, say it's a child or a fragile elderly patient, you know, I don't want them to buy anything more than a half CBD, half THC ratio. If that patient goes in and asks for the strongest THC product in the store, they can get it, because what I did was a recommendation, not a binding federal prescription. You know, if your doctor wrote you a prescription for Xanax at 5 milligrams, you can't go tell the pharmacy you want the 10s instead. Whereas in cannabis, you can. That one's a double-edged sword for me. But for right now, we're just recommending, not prescribing cannabis.
And I think a lot of people, we understand the legalities of the recommendations, because what we're basically doing is really complying with or trying to live within the current statutes of the law. But a reason for when people want prescriptions is not only because they want to know what to take, but also if you can have the cannabis be prescribed, it would then potentially, and I say potentially, be subject to being able to be covered by your medical insurance.
Correct. Yes. So most insurances won't pay for non-FDA approved medication. So like compounding, you know, even today, like compounded medicines are not FDA approved. And so most people pay out of pocket for hormone pellets or some of the GLP compounding. Cannabis is kind of over in that category as of now, but it could become prescribed and then covered by insurance.
The other question is, how long is my Florida medical marijuana card last?
So as of now, it's a year, so 365 days from the day you first apply for it. There have been proposed bills to change that, but for now it's yearly. And you know, our legislature won't be in session until spring of 27, so no, that won't be changing anytime soon.
So stay tuned around the spring time frame. It may or may not change. It hasn't changed in the last couple of years anyway, so we'll see what happens.
Correct.
The other question is, I'm using medical cannabis and I'm finding myself running out of, for example, either tincture or flower. How do I get my limit increased?
So it's a discussion with your physician. There is, as of 2023, I think that's the right year, is when we got the ability to do an exception. So before that, there was no, it was just, these are the limits and this is what we're stuck with. The request for exemption, the doctor has to submit it to the state. The state has up to 14 days to accept it or not. And depending on what they're asked for, they could ask for additional documentation. The state also put in the statute that, or into the rule, that they have the right to look at medical records from a patient without having the patient sign a written consent. It's again, so they can document why these requests are needed. Some doctors don't do them at all. When they came out, the state was pretty, you know, basically said, hey doctors, if you're doing anything crazy with these RFEs, we're going to come after not just your ability to recommend cannabis, but also your medical license. So it was pretty draconian. And so some physicians were like, I'm not doing the RFEs. So you could be seeing a doctor not willing to do them. Some doctors give them out freely. I am pretty picky with them. I want to see, you know, I go in and check, are you actually using what you have? Sometimes, like I was saying with that rolling limit, you know, shopping day, you know, you went in to shop on day 34 and you had nothing, but if you came back on day 36, you would have 2 ounces. So sometimes it's just an education issue, teaching the patients how to check the registry and how the math works, you know, that rolling limit versus a set, you know, a reset every 30 days like normal prescriptions do. But sometimes people are like, hey, you know, I've had some patients who had severe COVID and they cannot smoke or vape anymore and all they can use is the edibles. And so right now the limit is 6 edibles a day. And I have a patient that I got him, you requested up to 10 a day, but I have to say why. So, you know, edibles are the most effective form. The patient can no longer inhale due to severe COVID illness, and the state can approve it or not approve it. And I also make patients trade. I have patients trade. So an ounce of flower at 25% THC is basically worth 200 milligrams in the process routes. So if we're going up on flower, we go down on the other routes. That is not statutorily required. That is just a Dr. Beasley policy, because most people don't need, you know, if people are smoking more, they're not using as many pills. Or if they're using more pills and edibles, they're not smoking. I just find it a way that if I ever had to justify what I was doing with the state, you know, I'm not giving people more, I am trading out what is the most effective route for them. So I just felt better about my legal standing doing it that way.
I think the real reason for a lot of the limits is because the state didn't want to have somebody get a card and then become somebody who's just buying cannabis and dispensing it to his local community.
Exactly, the neighborhood hookup.
What is the difference between low THC cannabis and medical cannabis?
So again, these are just state defined words. It's in the statute definition part. So low THC is less than 0.8% THC by weight. It basically means a CBD product. You know, the definition of hemp is less than 0.3% THC. So the low THC cannabis definition for the state of Florida medical marijuana system system has a little bit more THC. I'm not sure it's a meaningful difference as far as how the effects in the body. And then medical marijuana would be the higher THC products, products that are higher than that 0.8% THC limit. So you have separate orders for each route. Those limits that we had up on the screen earlier with like the 60 edibles a day or the 200 milligrams of oral, those limits only apply to the THC product. So your CBD products don't have that. There is not a CBD gummy on the market CBD only product in the medical market, but if there were, you could have a 100 milligram CBD edible and be okay under the Florida statute. It's just not, none of the companies are making them. And if you look in the computer registry, you have separate orders for each. So under edibles, there's low THC and medical marijuana, and under inhalation, there's the same.
Now, there's a couple of things you can do. For example, you can own a gun and you can be a minor. I think this falls into your category where you're a pediatrician.
Right. So 18 and up, considered an adult, can just go and see the physician on their own. Pediatric patient needs 2 physicians. So it doesn't have to be a marijuana qualified physician. So I'm a pediatrician, but even though I'm a pediatrician, I need another physician. And my personal standard is it has to be a physician known to that child, willing to put in writing that the benefits outweigh the risks. 50-50 scale type thing. You don't have to be certain it works, but you have to have a reasonable expectation that the benefits of the cannabis. So think of an 8-year-old with a brain tumor with horrible vomiting and nausea. If they can have some cannabis that helps decrease the nausea, that lets them eat, that lets them keep their weight on, that's a plus. But does every 17-year-old with an anxiety disorder need cannabis? No. To me, that benefit does not outweigh the risk because that's still a developing brain. That brain's still developing to age 25. So we don't want to put more THC in it than we have to. That might be a different conversation for a 17-year-old who's had 3 suicide attempts due to their anxiety. That risk benefit scale changes, but it does require additional documentation. And I believe we have to supply that to the state, or at least be willing to supply it to the state to show that we have it.
Right. And I think some other things that are important to point out. There is no sales tax on medical marijuana here in the state of Florida. You really cannot take it across state lines. That's the important thing to point out. But I think there's something important to point out when you're traveling with medical cannabis. You got to keep it in the original container. Like if you're driving around the state, if I'm just driving in my car right now.
Right. So think of it like a prescription bottle. If you had a bottle of pain pills, you just can't have it in a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday pill organizer. You have to have it in the original little yellow orange bottle that has your name, your doctor's name, and the date it was prescribed. Same standard for the cannabis. Does law enforcement otherwise? Yes, you can show them your laminated marijuana card, but how do they know that product was bought legally? And that's where those name labels and data purchase helps law enforcement see that it was indeed a legal purchase under your medical marijuana card system.
And I think the other question that came back under the no category, which I will kind of say maybe, is can I use my Florida card in other states? I know I have used my card in California and Nevada, for example, and California and Nevada have special provisions for cards that are out of state, not necessarily just Florida. Florida doesn't recognize other states, but other states may allow you to do that.
If you know the state you're going to, you could, Google Arkansas Cannabis Division, office and look for the term reciprocity. So like Hawaii, you have to fill out paperwork online ahead of time. You can't cold call into the Hawaiian dispensary. Whereas Massachusetts, you can pay them $50, walk into their medical dispensary. The advantage of going, even in a state that has medical and recreational adult use, there's no sales tax on medicine. So, if you're on a trip to Las Vegas and you have your Florida medical card, you're getting a discount for being a medical patient and not paying sales tax, where I believe it's a 31% tax rate on recreational cannabis in Nevada. So it'd make a big cost difference taking that card with you if there's a reciprocal state.
Well, Dr. Beasley, we covered a lot of subjects. We answered a lot of questions. I think we still need to have people understand the OMMU is really the guiding light here in Florida as far as the laws, regulations, and what to follow.
It's always a changing area. So, even existing patients, I think, every once in a while going into the Know That Your Facts website, they do nice little one-page summaries of different issues. They have linked to, University of Florida has some research options for patients. So they'll link information there if you want to volunteer to participate in research. It's, new patients, but also existing patients, keeping up with that website and the information they have offered.
Dr. Beasley, thank you very much for joining us today. One of the things that I just want to point out, you've been around this program for 10 years. What would you say to somebody who's just thinking about medical cannabis for the first time?
My saying is use all the tools in the shed. So, it doesn't mean that cannabis will fix every symptom, everything in your life. I think if you haven't tried it and you're having persistent symptoms, it is certainly a reasonable option. It can a lot of times helps people, you might start it for pain, but it also helps you sleep and it also helps anxiety related to the pain. It's not not constipating like pain, opioid medications are. To me, which I didn't know about cannabis until I started doing this job, no one has ever died of a fatal overdose of cannabis. It doesn't affect your brainstem breathing. So why wouldn't you try it before? In very little physical addiction. You can certainly have psychological addiction, just like alcohol, but no physical addiction. And so why not use all, the tools that are available to you? You're Floridian, you have legal access to it, to see if it can help those persistent symptoms that are not being managed well currently.
Well, we've just covered a lot of material on the Florida medical marijuana program, and I want to tell you, it does seem like it's fairly complicated. That's one of the reasons why we're going to send you a copy of the deck in flipbook format. Actually, once you get into it, it kind of is a situation where the dispensaries and your medical marijuana doctor will help walk you through it, and the whole system is built to really help you address your particular condition and get the most out of medical cannabis. Now, that being said, please feel free to ask any questions you might have. But we're going to jump into the questions that were submitted prior to this webinar being recorded. First question is Marinol available in Florida without a prescription? Is it good for appetite loss due to chemotherapy? Well, first of all, I want to point out Marinol is a prescription drug, which means you need a prescription in order to buy it. It's not available over the counter. And is it good for appetite loss due to chemotherapy? It can help with that. There's no question. But I think if you use regular medical cannabis, I say regular, meaning cannabis made from the flower, you're going to be able to get better results. And the reason for that is because the medical cannabis that you buy here in Florida also has terpenes in it. Marinol does not. Marinol is just pure THC. So it's not, it'll address some of the chemotherapy issues, but the terpenes will really help you be able to get a lot, for example, your appetite back and be able to make you feel a lot better. So I would suggest that if you are looking at using medical cannabis for cancer or for chemotherapy treatment, use a medical marijuana product. That could be edibles, that could be flower, that could be tinctures. I think that's going to get better results from that than using Marinol by itself. Second question is there anything currently in the works to legalize recreational cannabis in Florida or the entire U.S.? There's been at least a couple of attempts to legalize recreational cannabis here in Florida. I know that there has been a program to try to put recreational cannabis on the ballot that DeSantis did a pretty good job of squashing, but there's a major effort inside of Florida, here in Florida, led by a number of different basically pro-cannabis groups to really get recreational cannabis approved here in Florida. It probably isn't going to happen in the next year or two, but I would say in the year 2028, you'll probably see a lot of movement in this particular area. Unfortunately, we have to deal with the legal justice gears to grind to be able to get that done. Now, as far as the entire United States, there's been a number of declarations that have been made by this current administration, and to be frank, by the past administration. Biden really started the whole program by being able to trying to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That was squashed by Trump when he came into office, so that he could then 6 months later pick that up and try to claim that as his prize. But really, what he did was just put out a executive order that said we're going to move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That is just a piece of paper. It needs behind it. It needs a number of different a number of different agencies to be able to jump on board and change their laws and regulations. And they're in the process of doing that right now. They've already had one meeting. They'll have at least 2 or 3 more meetings before they actually issue a statement. And from that statement is where they'll actually look at potentially rewriting the law. So it's not going to be until at least 2027 when we get a lot of the feedback from these what they call town hall meetings that they're having on this particular issue. It'll probably be end of 27, maybe 28 before you'll see any movement from the United States standpoint. And again, this is a highly controversial issue. This is a clear issue where the people of the United States want it, but certain political parties do not. So I think this is where we need to be able to just really, as cannabis folks that like cannabis, we need to stand up for our rights. We need to make our voices felt. Again, here in Florida, we had 74% of the people approve medical cannabis. That sends a real message to the lawmakers to be very careful and to tread lightly on these particular laws, because there's a lot of voters that really look at doing this. Last question that we have here is, can consuming daily gummies 10 to 30 milligrams cause tingling in your toes? That's an interesting question. I think that The important thing to understand about medical cannabis is that it really is different for every person. Our bodies have a different tolerance to cannabis. That's why we go through the whole dosing process where we say go low, go slow, and then figure out what your tolerance is to medical cannabis. I think it could cause tingling in your toes. I think before you get there, it'll probably cause some other things. You might feel you might not feel as let's say as normal as you normally do to being able to get there. But I think that again, it depends on you. It can happen. It's a rare occasion that it happens. I don't want to give anybody the impression that it's something that really happens, that it's out there, but it's something to really pay attention to as far as what cannabis does for you. Go through that dosing process, go low and go slow, and it should be able to help you be able to figure out what's the amount of dose that will really help you with your particular condition. And I don't, before we get off of this slide, I do want to point out in the purple here, if you're looking for changes to the medical cannabis program, here's a bit.ly link. It's bit.ly/FL schedule. We're trying to keep up with and follow the changes. Although there's been stated directions by these executive orders, there's work going on in the background that's kind of fleshing these out, and hopefully we're heading down the path where we're going to make these real. So we're going to try to stay on top of these changes. They don't happen on a daily basis. They kind of happen every week or two. But please, if you want to stay in touch with it, here's a link that you can use to be able to follow that up and to be able to look at it. I think we finished all of the questions that were submitted prior to the webinar. I think we had a lot of questions during the webinar. So I'm going to probably see if there are any last questions. Please feel free to ask. We'd like to be able to, again, make the program real for you so that you feel comfortable being able to use medical cannabis and make it something that's even part of your life. Next question is a couple more pre-submitted questions. Where can I find out more information about domestic and international travel with my medical marijuana card? And here's another bit.ly link that really gives you all the information on this. Let me be very, very clear. As of today, although there is a stated direction that to let TSA let you travel with medical cannabis, that is a stated direction. It is a piece of paper. It is not the law. Don't go to the airport and try to fly with your medical marijuana. You're going to probably run into a potential problem that we really don't want you to have. Pay attention to what the laws are, what's happening, and you'll be able to see when you'll be able to use medical cannabis or be able to travel with it. I think it's really important. Now that's from a domestic standpoint. From an international standpoint, there are international laws that have to change. I know there are some movements. I know the United Nations has proposed some changes to the cannabis regulations, assuming that the United States will make some changes in that area as well. But again, that's going to take a year or two, maybe even 3 years before something happens. So please stay on top of it. Be careful. Hopefully, we'll be able to take our medication with us like we do our regular medications. And that's the direction that we're heading, but we're not there. And I think that's important to point out. Next question is, I'm concerned about pesticides use when growing flower for my medical use. Can you please explain the testing? Yeah, I want to point out that one of the reasons why I recommend highly buying products from a licensed Florida medical marijuana dispensary, or candidly, any state licensed dispensary, is because by law, they have to test the product twice inside their house and then go to a third party outside firm. One of the tests that they do that I pay attention to is to use the pesticides, see if there's any mold, and also they give you the environmental condition that the product was grown in. So there is a lot of very stringent rules and regulations about pesticides. In fact, most of the dispensaries that here in Florida will tell you they use no pesticides at all. And I've visited over 10 grow facilities here in Florida. And what's interesting is every one of them, none of them use pesticides. They do use some natural products to be able to handle that, but it's something that they're concerned about as you. And I think it's important to point out we don't want pesticides in our medicine. That being said, that's one of the problems I have right now with the hemp market. Because when you look at a certificate of analysis, and by the way, how do you know if it's got pesticides or not? Ask your dispensary to give you what they call a certificate of analysis, referred to as a COA. That COA on it will actually list the pesticides or any pesticides that have been found, and you better have it say none, okay? Because like I say, a lot of growers don't even use pesticides, but it's something that you can check for prior to purchasing a product if that's your concern. One of my concerns about the hemp market is when you check their COAs, they do not give you information and feedback about the pesticides. And that's why I get very concerned about people who want to go smoke or use hemp products. I'm a big fan of hemp products. There's no question about it. but I really want to see a COA that gives me not only what the terpenes, the cannabinoids are in the product, but also the environmental effects that's really out there. So the answer is the testing that's done is very rigorous. There's a number of firms that are here, and basically it's a standard that has been set on a national and international level to be able to check out the pesticides that's really there. And again, here's a couple of bit.ly links that you can go to that'll give you information on those. It'll help you quite a bit. Let's jump into a live question that was asked. It says, when will veterans get a break on state fees? That is, again, a great question. And I wish that it would, happen tomorrow. There was a proposed amendment to the regulations here in Florida to give veterans free state medical marijuana cards. I know that it's still under discussion, believe it or not. And I think it was broken down. The discussions on this broke down towards the end, and veterans still have to pay that state fee for the medical marijuana card. I know there's a huge push, not only by veterans, but also groups that are within the medical marijuana community, like Normal, to really get those fees, basically waived. I would suspect that better than average chance that in the next legislative session, which is happening this fall, this may happen. It came very close to happening last time. But I would hope that it would happen the next time, and I'm very much in favor of it. I just hope that the politicians listen to the people who want medical cannabis and really give people a break, like the veterans who served their country and really deserve to get a break for the service that they gave. Anyway, that should hopefully answer that particular question. I don't see any other questions that are out there. I do want to say, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This was a fairly long webinar, but we had a lot of information to cover. You'll be getting a copy of this. A link to the email that give you a copy that you can find on our YouTube channel. That's YouTube/marijuana aware, that has not only this video, but other videos that can help you with your medical cannabis program. And I want to point out, if you're looking at getting products here in Florida that are quality products, again, people worried about the pesticides, the mold, the contaminants, go to quality dispensaries like Air dispensaries. Air does a great job of not only growing products, their COAs are very comprehensive. They do a great job of training their bud tenders to really help you with their particular product. And there's a number of locations throughout Florida. You'll find that there's quite a few locations. I think they're the second largest dispensary here in Florida. Please feel free to check them out. I highly recommend them. I use their products, and I think it's something that's really cool. And they have a groovy $5 off if you watch this webinar to get a discount on that. The other is, if you want to get a medical marijuana card, I recommend MMTC of Florida. And the reason for that is because not only do they have 23 locations, but they also when they get you your card, they do follow-up. A lot of times you'll go to a location, you'll see somebody in a hotel or someplace, you get a $99 or $125 medical marijuana card, and you don't get any follow-up. You don't know how to use it, you don't know what to do, you don't know how to dose it, and they leave the customers really hanging, and there's no support system. MMT has a call center that you can call in and get help with. It has a dosing center that can help you with your dosing, and of course your medical marijuana doctor is there local to be able to help you with your particular situation. So really, it's the support that you get. That's really the important part. Is it a little bit more expensive? Yes, it is. But the cost that you pay, the little bit more that you pay, is well offset by the fact that you're not spending more on product, and you're using just the right amount of products. So it's not costing you more, and more importantly, you're getting your particular condition addressed. I want to thank you very much for joining us. This is the end of our webinars this particular summer. We will be coming out with, very excited to have a whole new set of webinars and seminars next quarter, which we'll be announcing in the next couple of weeks. But I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I know, again, it was long, but it's something that hopefully will help you be able to get a lot out of your medical cannabis use, help you not only address your particular condition, but more importantly, help you get your life back. Thank you very much for joining us.